Welcome to ICAHD's Jeff Halper's monthly update of what's happening in Israel Palestine. Uh, I guess what we should talk about this month, naturally, are all the protests that are going on in Israel. That's the big news here. It's pushed the Palestinian issue to some degree to the side. The whole issue of the Netanyahu government trying to implement what it calls judicial reforms, and that the opposition and the I can't say the left, the liberal center opposition calls it a judicial coup. In other words, the idea is really that this goes far beyond some kind of refinements in the law, but it's trying to. Uh, what the center left is saying is it's really going to establish a kind of a dictatorship in Israel, on the lines of Hungary, Poland, Turkey, what Orban calls very honestly, it's a great description, an illiberal democracy. So, in some ways, this is a fight between people that want what they see as a liberal democracy and those that are pushing for an illiberal democracy in which the executive, which is Netanyahu, and the legislative branch, which is the Knesset, which his party controls in the coalition, have an absolute free hand to legislate any legislation they want, to implement any policy they want, and neutralizing the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, as being able to constrain or even override the government in any way. All this made easy, of course, by the fact that Israel has no constitution. Uh, so essentially, in a normal democracy, you have, well, every democracy is structured differently, but you have the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Here today, you only have two branches because the executive and the legislative, because they're controlled by one party, the Likud, and Netanyahu, who heads the Likud, is basically the governing two branches of government. And what does constrain them and hold them back is the Supreme Court. So that there's an attempt to legislate through a number of stages, laws that will neutralize the Supreme Court and basically create one branch of government run by Netanyahu. That's the illiberal democracy. So the big fight in Israel is between these two forces. And actually, Ilan Pape phrased it very well, and I made a little sketch out of a diagram over what Ilan had said. He's talking about the fight. Now, this is a completely intra-Israeli Jewish discussion. It has nothing to do with the Palestinian citizens of Israel who do not participate in the protests, and it certainly has nothing to do with the occupation. The idea is, and this has been true since the beginning of Zionism, is that this is a Jewish project. Zionism establishing a Jewish state and now going on and really consolidating that Jewish state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Uh, it's only a Jewish issue. It's an intra-Jewish discussion we're having. If we have fights over what this state of Israel would look like, it's between us and Arabs, because we don't use the term Palestinians here, because we don't want to legitimize their national status. Palestinians have nothing to do with it. They're outsiders. So this is a purely intra-Jewish. So the liberals on one side and the right wing on the other side are all Jewish. And that's the discussion. So in some ways, it really isn't that interesting for me and for people that are concerned with the bigger picture. What in fact is happening to Palestinians and what's going to happen if Israel does consolidate an apartheid regime over the country. So in some ways, uh, I'm out. I think I'm outside of it. I think ICAHD is outside of that debate because whether Israel is more liberal, more look liking a Western democracy, or whether it's less liberal like Hungary, really is irrelevant because its policies are the same. and that is to Judaize Palestine and to create an apartheid regime and transform the entire historic Palestine into a Jewish state. So it doesn't really matter what the internal dynamics are. Is an apartheid government a little more liberal? Is an apartheid government a little less liberal? But those are the discussions in Israel. And Ilan Pappé really put it well. He says this is a fight, again, inside Israel, between what he calls fantasy Israel and the state of Judah. Fantasy Israel is this fantasy that Israel is a Western democracy. You know, we share values with the United States and Western Europe. Um, you know, all citizens are equal here, whether they're Jewish or Arab, and that we're fighting to protect and defend a democracy, very much like an American democracy or a Western European democracy against the illiberal democracies of Eastern Europe. That's kind of the discussion. But it's a fantasy Israel because this so-called liberal democracy is a liberal democracy for Jews. You know, even in the most the golden days of the Labor Party, when Ben Gurion or Rabin or you know, Golda Meir or Peres or whoever was in power. Um, this was a settler colonial regime. You know, the one thing we have to remember is that the liberals that are the good guys that are trying to fight Netanyahu and judicial reform, they're the mainstream of Zionism. In other words, it was the Labor Party and the socialists, even if you want to put it that way. They saw themselves as socialists. The Labor Party was a member of the Socialist International. They're the ones that consolidated the idea of Zionism. You know, establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. They're the ones that did the Nakba in 1948. They are the ones that established the state of Israel. They're the ones that were in power when the Six-Day War happened in 67, in which the occupation occurred. They're the ones that began the settlement projects. And even in Oslo, when we were supposed to be negotiating with the Palestinians, it was the Labor Party under Rabin. It wasn't the Likud or Begin or Netanyahu or the right. It was Labor under Rabin that massively extended the settlements to a point where there was no more point in negotiating, and Oslo collapsed. In 1993, when the Oslo so-called peace process began, there were 200,000 settlers in the occupied territory. By 2000, when it collapsed, there were 400,000 settlers. Today, there's almost 800,000 settlers, and Bezalel Smotrich, who's a settler, who is now the finance minister and the governor of the West Bank, basically, has declared there'll be 1 million settlers within a couple of years in the West Bank. And he has released, as the head of the civil administration in the Ministry of Defense, released settlement planning from any government approval. You don't need approval anymore from the government to establish settlements, expand settlements. It's all on a commercial basis. And so, in a sense, without this whole issue of judicial reforms, democracy, Israel continues, both the left of Israel and the right of Israel, to pursue this apartheid colonial project. And so that's why Ilan says it's a fantasy democracy, a fantasy Israel that they're trying to protect. I mean, some of them don't want the occupation. Some of them are for two states, but it doesn't matter. With or without occupation, there has to be a Jewish state in historic Palestine, and so it can't be a liberal democracy because democracy does not extend to non-Jewish citizens. The other side is what we call, and this is a common phrase in Israel, the state of Judah. This is the religious Zionists, the settlers, basically, who reject Israel. They reject the concept of Israel because it's too democratic. It does offer at least formal citizenship to Arabs in the country, and they want a state of Judea, which is a nationalist theocracy, basically, over the entire country. And this is really the fight. They're the ones with Netanyahu and the Likud who are pushing for these judicial reforms, and therefore they're the ones that are scaring the liberal Israelis into thinking that yes, we're on our way to a theocracy and losing our civil rights. So that's really the fight. But if I open up the chart here, both of these sides agree on what they're defending or what they're promoting. And that is what we call an ethnocracy. You know, this apartheid state, settler colonial state, and an ethnocracy in which Jews are on top. It's your personal status, um, who you can marry, where you can live, what job you have, whether you can travel freely, whether you can get a driver's license. Everything depends on who you are, what religion you belong to, what ethnic group or nationality you belong to, and that's the basis of the Israeli ethnocracy. It's a Jewish state. And so Jews are obviously on top. Arabs, as we call them, are second class citizens, if that, and are being displaced from the country. And even below that, you've got, you have about 40,000 African asylum seekers that are living here in terrible conditions. They can't work, they don't have housing, they can't send their kids to school. I mean, that's a whole other issue, but it's a part of this whole hierarchy of ethnic groups that comes out of this idea that we have of Jewish supremacy, basically. And that's why I'm saying that, as interesting and dramatic as they are, these protests have really very little to do with the bigger issue that ICAHD is concerned with, and that is how to replace and decolonize the Israeli settler state end the occupation and take the entire historic Palestine from the Mediterranean to the Jordan and transform it into a democratic state of all its citizens. So this is, in a sense, what we would say, in a way. You know, we eliminate this. We don't take a side. There's no good side here. We, in a sense, eliminate this page, and we're trying to move towards the idea of one democratic state, which is the only way the civil and national rights of all the people living in this country can be respected, and the refugees, of course, can return. So that's my take. I'm trying to be as brief as I can on what's going on. The protests are dramatic. The language is language that will resonate with you, democracy versus dictatorship, and so on. But in fact, just realize that this is an internal, intra Jewish discussion that really has no impact whatsoever, either on the Palestinians or where Israel is going in terms of consolidating its apartheid regime over the entire country. So that's sort of my views in a brief segment for August, a hot August of 2023. And I wish you all well, and we'll meet in September. Bye.